The scream echoed through the palace catacombs at exactly midnight. Elena pressed herself against the cold stone wall, her heart hammering so violently she thought it might burst through her chest. Through the crack in the ancient door, she watched in absolute horror as King Obi raised his hands toward the young man chained to the ceremonial altar. The man's skin began to wrinkle, his hair turning white as snow within seconds. His screams grew weaker as his body withered like a dying plant under the harsh sun. Within moments, where a vibrant 25-year-old had been, only a desiccated corpse remained. King Obi breathed deeply, and before Elena's eyes, the small wrinkles at the corners of his eyes vanished. His skin glowed with renewed youth. He looked exactly as he had in portraits painted 80 years ago. Elena stumbled backward, her hand flying to her mouth to stifle her own scream. This couldn't be real. This couldn't be happening. But she had seen it with her own eyes. The beloved King Obi, ruler of the prosperous kingdom of Zubari, the man her people called the Eternal Guardian, was a monster who fed on the lives of his own subjects. But let's go back to the beginning. Let's go back to 3 weeks ago, when Elena Adeyemi was simply the royal historian, cataloguing the glorious reign of King Obi for the kingdom's archives. Let's go back to when she still believed in heroes. The festival of eternal reign filled the streets of Zubari's capital with music, dancing, and the intoxicating smell of suya and jollof rice. 80 years. 80 years of unprecedented prosperity under one king. No succession wars. No child rulers manipulated by scheming regents. No civil conflicts tearing the kingdom apart like those that plagued their neighbors. Just King Obi, wise and unchanging, guiding Zubari to greatness. Elena stood at her desk in the royal archives, surrounded by centuries of records, her fingers tracing over a portrait of King Obi painted 80 years ago during his coronation. Then she looked at the newspaper on her desk, bearing a photograph of the king from yesterday's pre-festival ceremony. She placed them side by side. Her breath caught in her throat. They were identical. Not similar. Identical. The same smooth skin. The same sharp jawline. The same eyes that seemed to hold ancient wisdom. Most men at 50 showed some gray hair, some wrinkles. King Obi had ruled for 80 years, which meant he should be well over 100 years old. Yet he didn't look a day over 30. The gods have blessed him, everyone said. Divine favor for his righteousness, the priest proclaimed. But Elena was a historian, trained to question, to dig deeper, to find truth in the layers of story and myth. She pulled out the kingdom's genealogical records, searching for King Obi's birth certificate. What she found made her blood run cold. According to official records, King Obi was born 234 years ago. The official history claimed that 3 different King Obis had ruled Zubari, each the son of the previous, each remarkably similar in appearance. A divine blessing running in the bloodline, they said. But Elena found personal letters in the archives, letters written by courtiers and nobles spanning 2 centuries. When she cross-referenced the handwriting, the personal anecdotes, the intimate details, a disturbing picture emerged. They were writing about the same man. The same King Obi. For 234 years. You look troubled, child. The ancient voice made Elena jump. Master Adebayo, the elderly chief librarian, stood behind her, his white beard reaching his chest, his eyes clouded with cataracts but still sharp with intelligence. Master Adebayo, I found something strange in the records. Strange how? Elena hesitated. In Zubari, questioning the king was dangerous. But this was Master Adebayo, her mentor, the man who had taught her that a historian's duty was to truth, not comfort. The king. He never ages. And I think he might be the same King Obi who founded this dynasty over 2 centuries ago. Master Adebayo's face paled. He moved closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. Elena, listen to me very carefully. Some questions are better left unasked. The kingdom is prosperous. The people are happy. Why disturb that? But if I'm right? If you're right, then there are reasons the king has kept this secret. Reasons that have allowed Zubari to thrive while other kingdoms fall to chaos. Do you understand what I'm saying? Elena stared at her mentor. You know. You've always known. Master Adebayo looked away. I know that I'm an old man who wants to die peacefully in his bed, not in a dungeon for treason. I know that my children and grandchildren live well under King Obi's rule. And I know that a wise historian knows which truths to write and which to bury. He placed a weathered hand on her shoulder. Forget this, Elena. For your own sake. But Elena couldn't forget. That night, she returned to the archives alone, diving deeper into the records. She found references to something called the Sacred Renewal, a ceremony performed every 7 to 10 years. Always with great fanfare, always culminating in the selection of a divine attendant, who would serve the king in his private chambers for a year before supposedly ascending to serve the gods directly. Elena pulled the records for every divine attendant for the past 200 years. 27 names. 27 young people between the ages of 20 and 28. All from prominent families. All healthy and vibrant. All vanished without a trace after their year of service. No graves. No records of their later lives. Nothing. She was so absorbed in her research that she didn't hear the footsteps until a voice spoke directly behind her. Burning the midnight oil, Elena. She spun around to find Captain Choku Okafor standing in the doorway, his hand resting casually on the hilt of his sword. Choku was the captain of the Royal Guard, a position he'd held for 12 years. He was known for his unwavering loyalty to the king and his sharp tactical mind. Captain, you startled me. These are dangerous hours to be wandering the palace alone. His eyes moved to the documents spread across her desk. Researching the divine attendants. Elena's heart raced. Had he been watching her? Just preparing for the selection ceremony next week. The king will be choosing the next divine attendant. Choku moved closer, his dark eyes studying her face. You know, I've been captain of the guard for 12 years. In that time, I've noticed things. Strange things. Sounds from beneath the old keep at night. The king's disappearances for days at a time. Guards who ask too many questions being reassigned to remote border posts. He paused. You're not the first person to notice the king doesn't age, Elena. But you might be the first with enough intelligence to find proof. Elena didn't know whether to run or stay silent. Choku could have her arrested for treason right now. Why are you telling me this? Because I'm tired of lying to myself. Choku's voice was heavy with something Elena recognized as shame. My family has served the crown for 4 generations. I trained my entire life to protect what I believed was a righteous king. But lately, I've been wondering what exactly I'm protecting. Before Elena could respond, the palace bells began to ring. The selection ceremony. The festival of eternal reign was culminating in the announcement of the next divine attendant. Elena and Choku exchanged glances and rushed toward the great hall. The throne room blazed with torchlight and ceremony. Nobles in their finest clothes lined the walls while King Obi sat on his throne, resplendent in royal blue and gold. His skin gleamed like polished mahogany, his eyes bright with an unsettling intensity. He looked like a god carved from stone and brought to life. My beloved people, King Obi's voice carried through the hall like thunder. For 80 years, I have had the honor of guiding Zubari to greatness. This prosperity comes not from my wisdom alone, but from the divine covenant between the throne and the heavens. Every generation, the gods demand a sacred offering, a bridge between mortal and divine. Elena felt sick as she realized what was coming. This year, the honor falls to Lord Emeka Nwosu. A young man stepped forward from the crowd, his face glowing with pride. He was 24 years old, handsome and strong, recently engaged to Lady Adis, Elena's childhood friend. The crowd erupted in applause. Emeka's family wept with joy. This was the highest honor in the kingdom. But Elena watched King Obi's eyes as they fixed on Emeka, and she saw something that made her blood turn to ice. Hunger. Raw, predatory hunger, quickly masked by a benevolent smile. That night, Elena couldn't sleep. She kept seeing Emeka's proud face, kept thinking of Adi's joy at her fiancé's selection. If her suspicions were correct, Emeka had just been sentenced to death. But she had no proof. Just patterns, coincidences, and a terrible intuition. A knock on her door at midnight made her jump. She opened it to find Choku, no longer in his guard uniform but dressed in dark, nondescript clothing. "Get dressed," he said. "There's someone you need to meet." "Who?" "A ghost." They moved through the sleeping city like shadows, Choku leading Elena through narrow alleys until they reached the poorest district of the capital, where beggars huddled in doorways and the smell of desperation hung thick in the air. He stopped at a crumbling building that might have once been a merchant's house. Inside, by the light of a single candle, sat an elderly woman. But as Elena's eyes adjusted, she realized the woman wasn't as old as she first appeared. Her body was bent and withered, her hands gnawed with arthritis, her face deeply lined. But her eyes were younger, and when she spoke, her voice had the quality of someone who should have been middle-aged, not ancient. "My name is Margaret Nwosu," the woman said. "I'm Emeka's great-aunt. Though my family doesn't acknowledge me anymore. They think I'm mad." "What happened to you?" Elena asked, kneeling beside the woman. Margaret's laugh was bitter. "I was chosen. 50 years ago, I was 25 years old, beautiful, full of life and dreams. I was selected as a divine attendant. My family celebrated. I was honored. And then I learned the truth." For the next hour, Margaret told her story. How she'd been taken to underground chambers beneath the palace. How she'd found other divine attendants there, some looking ancient despite being chronologically young. How she'd watched King Obi perform his ritual on a woman named Chioma, draining the life from her body until she was nothing but dust and bones. How Margaret had escaped through a collapsed tunnel during an earthquake, having aged 15 years in just 2 weeks of captivity. "I tried to tell people," Margaret said, tears streaming down her weathered face. "I screamed the truth in the marketplace. I went to the priest, to the nobles, to anyone who would listen. But who believes a hysterical woman claiming our beloved king is a demon? They called me mad. My own family disowned me to protect their reputation. I've lived in poverty ever since, watching every 7 to 10 years as another young person is selected, knowing exactly what fate awaits them." She grabbed Elena's hand with surprising strength. "Save my nephew. Save Emeka. Don't let him become what I almost became." As they left Margaret's hovel, Elena's mind raced. "We need proof. Real, undeniable proof. The catacombs beneath the old keep," Choku said. "I've heard sounds from there at night. Screaming. If the king is keeping his victims somewhere, it would be there. Can you get us in? I'm the captain of the guard. I can get us anywhere." 2 nights later, they made their move. Choku used his position to secure the keys to the sealed sections of the palace's underbelly. Elena brought parchment and charcoal to document whatever they found. As they descended into the darkness, the temperature dropped and the air grew thick with a wrongness that made Elena's skin crawl. The ancient tunnels beneath the palace were carved directly from the bedrock, their walls covered in symbols that predated Zubari itself. Choku's torch cast dancing shadows that seemed to move with malevolent intent. "These tunnels are older than the kingdom," Elena whispered. "This place belonged to the Ravencroft sorcerers before King Obi's dynasty. They found the first chamber filled with personal belongings. Clothes, jewelry, letters from families, all neatly organized and labeled." Elena's hands shook as she read the names on the labels. Every divine attendant from the past 2 centuries. These weren't people who had ascended to divine service. These were people who had died here. The next chamber made Elena vomit. Bones. Hundreds of bones, arranged in meticulous rows, each skeleton bearing a brass nameplate. She recognized some of the names from her research. Young people who should have lived full lives, reduced to anonymous remains in a forgotten tomb. "We need to leave," Choku said, his face ashen. "We have enough." A sound stopped them cold. Voices echoing from deeper in the catacombs. One voice in particular, rich and commanding, unmistakable. "King Obi." Elena and Choku extinguished their torch and moved silently toward the sound. They found a hidden observation point overlooking a large ritual chamber. What they saw would haunt Elena for the rest of her life. 3 people were imprisoned in iron cages. 2 looked ancient, their bodies withered and bent despite the fine clothes they wore. But one, a young man Elena recognized as Emeka, looked like he'd aged 5 years in the 3 days since his selection. His hair had streaks of gray. Lines creased his face. His eyes held the hollow look of someone who'd seen beyond the veil of reality and found only horror. King Obi stood before them, unchanged and beautiful, speaking with the casual tone of a teacher explaining a lesson. "You must understand, I don't do this out of cruelty. I am the bulwark against chaos. I've spent centuries learning to rule perfectly. Do you know what happens when kings die? Succession wars. Weak heirs manipulated by scheming nobles. Civil war. Foreign invasion. I've seen it destroy kingdoms greater than Zubari. But not here. Never here. Because I endure." One of the ancient-looking prisoners, a woman who could barely lift her head, croaked out words. "You're a monster." "No, Aisha," King Obi said gently. "Monsters destroy. I preserve. Your years, your brief decades, purchase peace for millions. You should be proud. You are honored, truly. You're the price of civilization." Emeka spat at the king through the bars of his cage. "Murderer. My family, Adis, they think I'm being blessed. You're making them celebrate as you prepare to kill me. They celebrate because they're happy. Because they're safe. Because they live in a kingdom that doesn't know war or famine or plague. That's what your life will purchase, Emeka. Generations of peace and prosperity." King Obi turned to the oldest-looking prisoner, a man whose skin hung from his bones like a burial shroud. "Isn't that right, Boniface? You were chosen 8 years ago. You've seen how well your sacrifice has served the kingdom." Boniface could only weep. King Obi sighed and moved to the woman, Aisha. "I'm sorry, my dear. Your time is complete. You've aged 41 years in your 8 years of service. There's nothing left to take." He began chanting in a language Elena didn't recognize, his hands weaving patterns in the air that seemed to glow with sickly green light. Aisha screamed. Elena had to look away, but she couldn't block out the sounds. The wet, crackling sounds of a body withering rapidly. The screams that grew weaker and weaker until they stopped entirely. And then King Obi's gasp of pleasure as he absorbed what remained of Aisha's life force. When Elena forced herself to look again, Aisha was gone. Only dust and bones remained in the cage. And King Obi looked even younger than before, his skin glowing with vitality, the faint scars on his hands from some long-ago battle completely vanished. He looked at Emeka with something almost like compassion. "In a few weeks, once you're properly prepared, it will be your turn. The process works better when you understand what's happening. Your fear, your despair, it enriches the magic somehow. Makes the years taste sweeter." Emeka screamed curses until his voice broke. King Obi simply smiled, extinguished the ritual torches, and left the chamber in darkness. Elena and Choku fled back through the tunnels, both of them too traumatized to speak. They emerged into the palace gardens as dawn broke over Zubari, the beautiful city waking to another day of ignorant peace. "What do we do?" Choku finally asked. "If we tell people, they won't believe us. The king is too beloved. Too powerful. We have to try, Elena said, though her voice shook with doubt. We can't let Emeka die. They spent the next day gathering every piece of evidence they could find. The ledgers showing payments for disposal of ceremonial remains. The architectural plans showing the sealed catacombs. Margaret's testimony. Their own eyewitness account. Elena even managed to steal the king's private journal from his study, a leather-bound book where he meticulously recorded each ritual, each victim, each year consumed. That evening, they went to Adi's, Emeka's fiancée. She deserved to know the truth. They found her in her family's estate, sewing a ceremonial robe for Emeka's former investiture as divine attendant. Adi's, Elena began carefully. I need you to listen to me. Really listen. Your life and Emeka's life depend on it. She told her everything. She showed her the evidence, the journal entries in King Obi's own hand. She watched Adi's face transform from confusion to disbelief to fury to a determination that frightened Elena with its intensity. Then we kill him, Adi said simply. Tonight. It's not that simple, Chukwu protested. He has guards, magical protections. I don't care. Adi stood, her eyes blazing. That monster has Emeka in a cage, aging him to death. Do you expect me to do nothing? They formulated a desperate plan. Chukwu would use his position to gain access to the king during his nightly walk through the portrait gallery. Elena had found a rare poison in the archives called devil's breath, extracted from a plant that grew in the southern swamps. According to ancient texts, it could kill even those protected by magic. Adis would distract the guards while they made their move. But as they prepared to execute their plan, Elena's hands shook. What if we're wrong? What if there's another explanation? We saw him drain that woman's life, Chukwu said. We saw the bones. We saw Emeka aging in that cage. What other explanation could there be? That night, everything went according to plan. Too well, Elena would later realize. Chukwu's guard access got them into the gallery. The poison wine was delivered to King Obi as he admired portraits of himself through the centuries. They watched from behind a pillar as he drank deeply. King Obi smiled directly at their hiding place. Did you truly think you were the first to try? He said conversationally. I've survived 43 assassination attempts over 2 centuries, including 6 poisonings. My body has adapted to every toxin known to man. He set down the wine glass. Elena Adeyemi, Captain Okafor, Lady Adis, please come out. We have much to discuss. Guards flooded in from every doorway. Chukwu tried to fight, but he was overwhelmed in seconds. Elena and Adis were seized and dragged before the king. I'm actually impressed, King Obi said, his tone genuinely admiring. Most people who stumble onto my secret either deny it or convince themselves it's justified. But you 3 have courage. Intelligence. That's valuable. He dismissed the guards with a wave, leaving only his most trusted captain to stand by the door. I'm going to make you an offer, the king continued. Not because I fear you, but because I respect you. Join me. Not as victims, but as partners. Elena, your mind is wasted cataloging dusty records. I could give you access to knowledge spanning centuries. Chukwu, your loyalty deserves better than a doomed cause. I can grant you command over all my forces. Adis, I can give you Emeka back, alive and whole. All I ask is your silence and your service. You want us to help you murder people, Elena said. I want you to help me maintain the greatest kingdom this continent has ever seen. How many lives have I saved by preventing civil wars? How many children have grown up in peace because Zubari doesn't tear itself apart every generation with succession conflicts? The mathematics are simple. 27 lives over 2 centuries versus hundreds of thousands saved. Adis lunged at him, screaming. Guards restrained her. You murdered your way to immortality and call it civilization. King Obi's expression hardened. I ended the cycle of violence that plagued every kingdom before mine. I've perfected governance. I am the answer to humanity's fundamental problem. We put too much power in the hands of mortals who die too quickly to learn wisdom. I am the eternal king, and I have made Zubari paradise. Elena found her voice, though it came out smaller than she intended. But the cost. The specific cost of Emeka, of Aisha, of 27 others. They are not statistics. They are people. Everyone is people. King Obi roared, his composure finally cracking. The soldiers who die in wars are people. The children who starve during famines are people. The innocents massacred when kingdoms fall to chaos are people. I have eliminated all of that. 27 carefully chosen deaths have prevented hundreds of thousands of random ones. That is the burden of rulership. That is the choice I make so no one else has to. The horrible thing, Elena realized, was that he believed it. He genuinely saw himself as the hero of this story. You've had centuries to build something better than this, she said. Instead, you've built a throne on corpses and called it enlightenment. You're not civilization's guardian. You're its parasite. And maybe the kingdom will fall without you. Maybe thousands will die. But they'll die free of you. And maybe they'll build something better than a kingdom that requires human sacrifice to function. King Obi's face twisted with rage, then smoothed back into its usual benevolent expression. Then you've chosen poorly. Guards, take them to the catacombs. They can join Emeka and Boniface. And since you care so much about the personal cost, Elena, I'll make sure you have months to contemplate it before your ritual. They were dragged toward the dungeons, but Elena had one last desperate card to play. The nobles, she screamed. Take us to court tomorrow. Let us speak before the assembled nobility. If they choose to accept your murders, fine. But let them choose. King Obi paused. For a long moment, he considered. Then he smiled. Very well. One last theatrical gesture before the end. Tomorrow at dawn, you have your moment before the court. But I warn you, Elena. The truth you're so desperate to share might not set you free. It might just make you realize how alone you truly are. That night, locked in a cell adjacent to Emeka's, Elena, Choku, and Adis prepared their final gambit. Through the bars, they could see Emeka, who now looked like a man of 35 despite being 24. His hair was half grey. Deep lines creased his face. Adis, he called out weakly. Is that you? I'm here, my love. I'm here. They spoke through the night, making plans, preparing for the morning. Margaret, the survivor, had told Elena something crucial. The king's power came from a ritual object, an ancient crown that had belonged to the Ravencroft sorcerers. It was kept in the throne room, hidden in plain sight. If they could destroy it, they might be able to break the king's immortality. At dawn, they were brought before the assembled nobility in the great throne room. Every prominent family in Zubari was present. King Obi sat on his throne, looking amused and supremely confident. Speak, he said. Tell them your truth. Elena stepped forward, her heart pounding. She told them everything. The catacombs. The bones. The aging victims. The 200-year reign. She showed them the king's journal, reading aloud passages where he described his rituals in clinical detail. The nobles reacted with shock, with gasps, with horrified whispers. But then King Obi stood, and the room fell silent. Everything she says is true, he announced calmly. The room erupted in chaos. But King Obi raised his hand, and silence fell. Yes, it's true. And I've carried this terrible burden alone for 2 centuries, making the hardest choice so none of you had to. I've sacrificed my own humanity to preserve yours. 27 lives across 234 years to save millions. Look around at the other kingdoms. Our neighbors suffer plague, starvation, and war. Then look at Zubari. Look at your full bellies. Your safe children. Your prosperity. That's what those 27 purchased for you. And to Elena's horror, she saw nobles nodding. She saw acceptance in their eyes. The mathematics of atrocity, dressed up as pragmatism. But Lord Emeka is aging in a cage right now. Adi screamed. My fiancé is dying. One man, a noble said quietly. One man to preserve a kingdom. Would you say the same if it were your son? Choku demanded. The noble looked away, shamefaced, but didn't argue. King Obi's smile was triumphant. You see, Elena. This is why I rule. Because I'm willing to make choices that lesser people cannot stomach. Because I alone have the strength to do what must be done. But Choku did something unexpected. He drew his sword and threw it at the king's feet. Then I challenge you, he said, his voice carrying through the hall. By the old laws of Zubari, any citizen may challenge the king to single combat. If you're truly justified in your actions, if you're truly the righteous ruler you claim to be, then fight me. Kill me yourself instead of hiding behind magic and cages. The nobles murmured. The old challenge law hadn't been invoked in a century, but it was still technically valid. King Obi's eyes narrowed. You would die. Yes. But at least I'd die like a man, not like cattle bred for slaughter. For a moment, something flickered across the king's face. Respect. Anger. Then he laughed. No. I don't owe you a warrior's death, Captain. You're traitors, all three of you. And traitors die as traitors. He gestured to his guards. Take them back to the catacombs. The court has spoken. Zubari accepts the price of peace. As they were dragged away, Elena saw nobles looking at their feet, shame on their faces. But none of them spoke up. None of them moved to help. The kingdom had chosen. But Elena had one last move to make. As they passed the throne, she grabbed the hidden knife she'd stolen from a guard earlier and lunged not at the king, but at his crown. The ancient, jeweled crown that sat on a pedestal beside the throne. She stabbed it with all her strength. The crown shattered. King Obi screamed, a sound of pure anguish that shook the rafters. He clutched his chest as if in pain, and for the first time in 2 centuries, his skin began to wrinkle. Just slightly, but unmistakably. The agelessness was breaking. What have you done? He roared, and in his eyes, Elena saw something she'd never expected to see. Fear. The guards dragged her away, but she was laughing now, a wild, desperate laughter. Now you'll age like the rest of us. Now you'll die. But King Obi's voice followed her down to the dungeons. Foolish girl. The crown slowed the aging, but the rituals still work. I just need more victims now. More frequent rituals. You haven't saved anyone. You've just doomed more people to die. If you're still watching, subscribe now. Because what happens next will change everything. Hit that notification bell and drop a comment below. Tell me, what would you do in Elena's position? Would you stay silent to keep the kingdom stable, or would you fight even knowing you might fail? In the catacomb cell, Elena sat in darkness, Choku and Adis beside her. Emeka was in the next cell, now looking like a man of 40, aging a year every few hours. They had failed. The kingdom had chosen comfortable lies over terrible truths. King Obi would continue his reign, now consuming victims more frequently to compensate for the broken crown. I'm sorry, Elena whispered. I thought people would care. They do care, Choku said bitterly. They just care more about their own comfort. Adis was crying, reaching through the bars toward Emeka. I love you, she said. I love you, and I'm so sorry I couldn't save you. You tried, Emeka said, his voice that of an old man now. That's more than most would do. Footsteps echoed in the tunnel. King Obi emerged from the darkness, torches flaring to life around him. He looked tired now, the destruction of the crown taking its toll. He would age naturally unless he performed rituals more frequently. Which meant more victims. More death. I could have let you serve, he said to Elena. I could have shown you centuries of accumulated wisdom. Instead, you forced my hand. The ritual for you begins tonight. Wait. A new voice echoed from the darkness. Margaret, the ancient survivor, stepped into the torchlight, supported by a group of ragged figures. They disappeared. The families of previous victims. People who had been searching for the truth for decades. You're not the only one with allies, Your Majesty. King Obi laughed. What will you do? A mob of beggars and conspiracy theorists. My guards will cut you down. Your guards aren't coming, Margaret said. And Elena heard it then. The sound of fighting above. The clash of steel. Screams. I may be old, Margaret continued, but I spent 50 years planning this. I found the families. I found the survivors of those your victims left behind. I showed them what you showed Elena. And I waited for the right moment. She looked at Elena. Thank you for creating that moment. The tunnel behind Margaret filled with people. Dozens of them. Angry people who had lost children, siblings, lovers to the divine attendant selections. People who had been dismissed as mad or bitter. People who finally had proof. King Obi's face transformed from amusement to fury. You think numbers matter? I am a king of magic and power. He began chanting, the same ritual words Elena had heard in the chamber, his hands weaving patterns of sickly green light. But Margaret did something unexpected. She sang. An old song, in a language even older than King Obi's ritual. Elena recognized it from her studies. It was from the original inhabitants of this land, from before the kingdoms, from before written history. A song of binding. A song of ending. The green light faltered. King Obi's eyes widened. That's impossible. Those songs were lost. Nothing is ever truly lost, Margaret said. You just have to know where to look. And I had 50 years to look. The mob surged forward. King Obi tried to fight, his magic sputtering and failing as Margaret's song grew stronger, as other voices joined her. He was strong, but he was one man against dozens. They tore him from the cells, dragged him through the tunnels. Elena, Choku, and Adis were freed. Emeka collapsed into Adis' arms, looking like a man of 60 now, most of his life stolen but still alive. What will you do with him? Elena asked Margaret. The same thing he did to his victims, Margaret said grimly. Lock him in a cage. Let him age naturally, experiencing every year he stole from others. Let him die slowly, knowing he's mortal after all. King Obi screamed curses and threats as they dragged him deeper into the catacombs, to the very cells where he'd kept his victims. His voice echoed through the tunnels, the kingdom will fall without me. Civil war. Chaos. You doom Zubari. Maybe he was right. In the days that followed, Zubari did descend into chaos. Noble families fought for the throne. The neighboring kingdoms, sensing weakness, prepared for invasion. The golden age of peace and prosperity teetered on the edge of collapse. But Elena, recovering in the palace above, felt something she hadn't felt in weeks. Hope. Because now the people of Zubari had a choice. They could build something new. Something that didn't require human sacrifice. It would be hard. People would die in the transition. But they would die free. 3 months later, Elena stood in the throne room, now converted into a council chamber. Zubari had chosen a new form of government, a council of elders from each province, ruling together instead of one eternal king. It wasn't perfect. They argued constantly. Decisions took weeks instead of hours. The southern provinces were still threatening secession. 2 assassination attempts on council members had already occurred. But it was theirs. Built by them, for them, without the shadow of ancient evil hanging over it. Emeka had survived, though he looked 20 years older than his actual age. He and Adis had married in a quiet ceremony, grateful for whatever time they had left together. Choku had been appointed to lead the new Citizens Guard, a force loyal to the council rather than any single ruler. Margaret had finally been acknowledged by her family, welcomed back with tears and apologies that came far too late. And Elena returned to the archives, but this time as the chief historian, tasked with recording the truth. All of it. The glory and the horror. The prosperity and the price. She was in the archives late one evening, writing by candlelight, when she heard footsteps in the hall. Slow, shuffling footsteps. Her hand moved to the knife she now kept at her belt. A figure emerged from the shadows. For a moment, Elena's heart stopped because the face was young and beautiful, exactly as she remembered. King Obi. But then she saw the chains around his wrist, heard the labored breathing, noticed the slight stoop in his posture. He was aging, finally, kept alive but imprisoned in the deeper cell of the catacombs. "How did you escape?" she demanded. "I didn't." His voice was rougher now, showing hints of mortality. "Your Captain Choku brought me. Under guard. I asked to see you." "Why?" King Obi moved closer, and she saw that he wore iron shackles inscribed with Margaret's binding songs. His power was contained, his magic sealed. He was just a man now. An old man in a young body that was finally, slowly, catching up to his true age. "I wanted you to know something," he said. "You were right. About everything. I had centuries to build something better, and instead I built a cage of my own making. I told myself I was saving the kingdom, but really, I was just afraid to die. Is that supposed to be an apology? No. I killed 27 people. Nothing I say can change that. But I wanted you to understand something else." He leaned closer, his eyes intense. "You think you've won. You think by destroying me, you've saved Zubari. But kingdoms don't work the way you think they do. They need strength. Unity. Purpose. Without me, Zubari will tear itself apart. The council already shows cracks. The southern provinces are days away from open rebellion. Your neighboring kingdoms are gathering armies. We'll find our way. Will you? Or will you just end up with a different tyrant? Someone worse than me. Someone without my restraint." He smiled, and it was terrible. "Here's what keeps me warm in my cell, Elena. The knowledge that in 5 years, maybe 10, when Zubari is burning and the people are dying in civil war, you remember this conversation. You remember that you had a choice, comfortable stability under me, or freedom with chaos. And you chose chaos." Elena stood, her fist clenched. "Get him out of here." Guards emerged from the shadows, pulling King Obi back toward the dungeons. But his voice echoed back, "They'll beg for me to return, Elena. Mark my words. When the kingdom falls, they'll wish they'd accepted the price of peace." The next morning, Elena woke to alarming news. The southern provinces had declared independence. Civil war had begun. The kingdom King Obi had held together for 2 centuries was fracturing along its ancient fault lines. Choku came to her chambers, his face grim. "It's starting. Just like he said it would. So we fight. We hold the kingdom together. Elena, we are losing. The southern lords have twice our forces, and the northern territories are refusing to send aid. In 2 months, maybe 3, the capital will be under siege. Then we find a way. Some of the council members are talking about it," Choku interrupted. "About bringing him back. Just temporarily, they say. Just until the crisis passes. They think his authority might be enough to prevent civil war." Elena felt ice in her veins. No. Absolutely not. We fought too hard. People are dying, Elena. Thousands of them. Villages burned. Families torn apart. And for what? So we can feel good about choosing freedom. Choku's voice cracked. I executed 24 people this week for looting. 24 people who were just hungry because trade routes are cut off. Is this better than what we had? It has to be. Does it? Choku looked at her with haunted eyes. Or are we just choosing different victims? At least under King Obi, we knew who would die. 27 people every few centuries. Now it's random. Soldiers. Civilians. Children caught in crossfire. Tell me, Elena. What's the mathematics of your freedom? He left her alone with that question. Alone with the knowledge that King Obi's words were coming true. The kingdom was falling apart. That night, Elena descended into the catacombs. She needed to see him, to confront him, to prove to herself that they'd made the right choice. The guards let her pass, knowing she had authority here. King Obi sat in his cell, aging slowly but visibly now. He looked up as she approached, a knowing smile on his face. Come to gloat. Or to beg. Neither. I came to tell you that you're wrong. The kingdom might be struggling now, but we'll survive. We'll build something better. At what cost? How many thousands will die before you achieve your utopia? He stood, moving to the bars. Let me out, Elena. Not to rule, just to advise. I can stop this civil war with a single decree. I can bring the southern provinces back into line. I can save your kingdom. At the price of more victims. More divine attendants. One life to save thousands. That's still good mathematics. Elena found herself wavering. What if he was right? What if the price of freedom was too high? What if some kingdoms needed a strong hand to survive? Then she thought of Emeka, aged beyond his years. She thought of Aisha, screaming as her life was drained away. She thought of 27 names in a ledger, reduced to statistics in service of the greater good. No, she said firmly. Whatever happens, we'll face it as free people. Not as cattle bred for sacrifice. King Obi's smile faded. Then I hope you can live with your choice. Because the blood of everyone who dies in this civil war is on your hands as much as mine. Elena walked away from his cell, from his words, from his temptation. But his voice followed her up the tunnel. They'll come back for me, Elena. When the suffering gets bad enough, they'll release me. Humanity always chooses security over freedom in the end. 2 weeks later, the capital was indeed under siege. The southern armies had broken through the northern defenses faster than anyone expected. The council was in chaos, unable to agree on a strategy. Some members had fled to neighboring kingdoms. Others were negotiating separate peace treaties that would tear Zubari into a dozen small principalities. And in the council chamber, the debate that Elena had dreaded finally emerged. We should release him, Lord Adebola said. The same Lord who had condemned King Obi 3 months ago. Temporarily. Just until the crisis passes. Are you insane? Margaret stood, her ancient body trembling with fury. He's a monster. He's a monster who kept us safe for 200 years, another council member argued. Look at us now. We are dying. Our children are dying. The kingdom is dying. The argument raged for hours. Elena watched in horror as more and more council members sided with releasing King Obi. The mathematics of desperation. The seductive promise of safety at any cost. When the vote was finally called, it was split evenly. 6 for release. 6 against. The deciding vote fell to Elena, as chief historian and the one who had exposed King Obi in the first place. Every eye in the chamber turned to her. The weight of the kingdom rested on her choice. Release the monster and save thousands in the short term, or keep him in prison and let the civil war continue, potentially costing even more lives. Elena thought of Emeka, of Aisha, of 27 names in a ledger, of the principle that some costs are too high, no matter the benefit. But she also thought of the villages burning, of the children starving because trade routes were cut, of the soldiers dying in pointless battles, of all the blood that was being spilled in the name of freedom. I vote. She began, her voice steady despite her shaking hands. Before she could finish, the chamber doors burst open. Choku ran in, his armor covered in blood. The Southern Army has breached the outer walls. They'll be in the city within hours. Chaos erupted. Council members fled in panic. The vote was forgotten in the scramble for survival. Elena found herself alone in the chamber with Margaret and Choku. "We're out of time," Choku said. "If the city falls, everything we fought for dies anyway." Margaret looked at Elena with eyes that had seen too much. "Whatever you decide, I'll support you. But know this, some choices don't have right answers. Only consequences we have to live with." Elena ran down to the catacombs, Margaret and Choku following. The guards had already fled their post. King Obi stood at the bars of his cell, waiting. He looked older now, approaching middle age in appearance, but his eyes still held centuries of cunning. "I can hear the battle," he said calmly. "Your city is falling. Your kingdom is dying. And you come to me now, at the very end, to make your choice." Elena pulled the key from the fleeing guard's abandoned post. She held it up, her hand shaking. "If I release you, will you stop the civil war?" "Yes." "Will you return to your rituals? Your victims?" King Obi was silent for a long moment. "The binding songs Margaret used weakened my magic significantly. I would need to perform rituals more frequently. Perhaps one every year instead of every decade. But yes, I would need to continue. It's the only way to maintain immortality, and immortality is the only way to provide eternal stability. So we trade one death a year for peace." "Yes." "Good mathematics." Elena looked at the key in her hand. At the man in the cell who was offering to save everyone at the cost of nameless future victims. At Margaret, who had suffered under his reign. At Choku, who wore the weight of impossible choices on his face. The sounds of battle grew closer. Screaming. The clash of steel. Buildings burning. The Southern Army was in the city now. If you've made it this far, comment below what you would do. Release the immortal king and save the city at the cost of future victims. Or keep him in prison and let the kingdom fall. There's no easy answer. Hit that like button and subscribe because this story isn't over yet. Elena made her choice. She turned the key in the lock. The cell door swung open. King Obi stepped out, stretching muscles that hadn't moved freely in months. He smiled at her, a smile of triumph. "You've chosen wisely," he said. "Now take me to the throne room. I'll address the Southern Army and..." Elena stabbed him. The knife she'd carried since that first night in the catacombs plunged into his chest, exactly where a human heart would be. King Obi looked down in shock as blood bloomed across his royal robes. What have you done?" "I've made my choice," Elena said. "No more victims. No more sacrifices. The kingdom falls or stands on its own merits, without you." King Obi collapsed, his hand clutching the wound. But he was laughing, blood bubbling from his lips. "Foolish girl. You think killing me saves anyone? The civil war continues. The kingdom falls. And all for what? A principle. A feeling. For the right to choose our own fate," Elena said. "Win or lose." King Obi's eyes began to dim, but his voice remained strong. "Then know this. I planted seeds throughout the kingdom. Artifacts. Knowledge. Other artifacts like my crown. In 50 years, or 100, someone else will find what I found. They'll discover immortality. And maybe they'll be worse than me. Maybe they'll have less restraint. Less mercy. His hand reached out, grabbing Elena's wrist with surprising strength. The cycle continues, Elena. You haven't ended anything. You've just reset the clock. And then he died. King Obi, the eternal guardian, the monster who had ruled for 2 centuries, died on the floor of his own dungeon, bleeding out from a mortal wound like any other man. The battle sounds grew louder. The southern army was at the palace gates now. Choku drew his sword. We need to go. Now. Wait. Margaret knelt beside King Obi's body, her hands moving in complex patterns, chanting the binding songs. If what he said is true, if there are other artifacts, we need to make sure no one can use them. These songs will neutralize any magic he left behind. The chanting grew louder, and Elena felt something shift in the air. A presence that had hung over Zubari for 2 centuries suddenly lifted. The oppressive weight of ancient magic evaporated. But the sounds of battle didn't stop. The southern army didn't suddenly lay down their weapons. King Obi's death didn't solve the civil war. It just removed one option from the table. They fled the palace as it fell to southern forces. Escaped through secret passages that Elena had mapped during her time as historian. They emerged in the slums where Margaret had once lived in poverty, where the refugees of war now huddled in fear. What now? Choku asked. The kingdom is lost. The council is scattered. We have nothing. Elena looked at the frightened faces around her. People who had lost homes, families, everything. People who were paying the price of freedom with their blood and suffering. For a moment, she wondered if King Obi had been right. If this was better than his carefully managed peace. Then she saw something that changed her mind. In the ruins of a burned building, a group of people were organizing. Not fleeing. Not fighting. Organizing. Creating supply lines for food. Treating the wounded. Building barricades not to fight, but to protect civilians. We rebuild, Elena said. Not as subjects of an eternal king. As citizens of our own destiny. The southern army will kill us all, Margaret warned. Maybe. Or maybe we show them another option. King Obi was right about one thing, kingdoms need unity. But unity doesn't have to come from fear or magic or sacrifice. It can come from shared purpose. Over the next 3 months, Elena did something King Obi never expected. She negotiated. She talked to the southern lords, not as conquered enemies, but as fellow citizens of Zubari. She showed them the catacombs. The bones. The evidence of what their beloved king had really been. She offered them not victory, but partnership. Some refused. Some called her a traitor and a fool. But others listened. Others who were tired of war, tired of fighting, tired of watching their own people suffer. Slowly, impossibly, a new Zubari began to emerge from the ashes. Not ruled by one eternal king or even a council of elders, but by representatives from every province, including the south. It was messy. It was inefficient. It was imperfect. But it was theirs. 5 years later, Elena stood in the rebuilt palace, now called the People's Hall. She was older, her hair showing streaks of grey, her face lined with the stress of war and reconstruction. Emeka had died 2 years ago, his stolen years finally catching up with him, but Adiz had remarried and had children. Choku commanded a unified army of North and South, training them to protect rather than conquer. Margaret had finally passed away peacefully, her long life ending not in bitterness but in hope. And Zubari survived. Not as the glorious kingdom of legend, but as something more real. A nation of people who had chosen freedom over safety, principle over pragmatism. But Elena couldn't shake King Obi's final words. About other artifacts. About the cycle continuing. About someone else finding what he had found. She returned to the archives, now conducting her own secret research. Hunting for the artifacts King Obi had mentioned. Destroying them when she found them. It became her life's work, her obsession. Because she knew the temptation of immortality would always exist. The desire for an eternal ruler who could save people from themselves. One evening, while searching through old Ravencroft documents, she found something that made her blood run cold. A journal entry from King Obi, written in his own hand decades ago. If I should fall, I have prepared for succession. My knowledge is preserved. My methods are recorded. In the northern mountains, in a cave marked with the sign of the serpent, I have hidden a complete repository of my rituals, my magic, my secrets. For the one worthy enough to find it. For the next eternal guardian. Elena stared at the journal entry, her hands shaking. King Obi had been right. He hadn't ended the cycle. He just delayed it. Somewhere out there, his knowledge waited to be discovered. Waited to create another monster. She called for Choku, showed him the entry. They would need to mount an expedition to the northern mountains. They would need to find that cave and destroy everything in it. But as she prepared for the journey, Elena received a letter. An unsigned letter, delivered by a hooded messenger who vanished before she could question him. The letter contained one sentence. I found it first. And I'm smarter than he was. Thank you for removing my competition. The next reign of the Eternal Guardian begins tomorrow. Only this time, you won't even know who I am until it's far too late. Elena ran to the window, her heart pounding. In the city below, life continued as normal. People laughing, walking, living. Free people, unaware that somewhere among them, a new threat was awakening. Someone who had found King Obi's secrets. Someone who would be harder to stop because they'd learned from his mistakes. She looked at Choku, seeing the same realization dawn on his face. It's starting again, he said. Then we stop it again, Elena replied. However long it takes. Whatever the cost. But as she watched the city, she saw a figure standing on a distant rooftop. Too far to make out details, but she could feel eyes on her. Watching. Waiting. The figure raised a hand in a mocking salute, then vanished into the shadows. Somewhere in Zubari, a new immortal king was rising. Someone who had learned from King Obi's failures. Someone who wouldn't make the same mistakes. Someone who would be invisible, untraceable, until it was too late to stop them. And Elena realized with growing horror that King Obi's final laugh was still echoing through the kingdom. The cycle hadn't ended. It had only evolved. If you want to know what happens next, if you want to see Elena's hunt for the new immortal threat, then subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications. Because this story isn't over. The war against immortal tyrants has just begun. Comment below with your theories about who the new threat could be. Drop a like if this story kept you on the edge of your seat. And remember, some evils never truly die. They just find new faces to wear. The last shot shows Elena standing at her window as night falls over Zubari. In the darkness below, thousands of candles flicker to life as citizens light their evening lamps. And among those thousands of lights, one burns with an unnatural green glow. The same sickly green of King Obi's magic. It burns for just a moment, then vanishes. But Elena saw it. And she knows. The hunt begins tomorrow.